South China Morning Post, 15th of August 2022, how Beijing's belligerence over Taiwan is connected to a Belt and Road initiative and distress. China wants to distract her people from the trillion-dollar Belt and Road fiasco. To do this, she is creating trouble with Taiwan. In the wake of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, many analysts in Washington are inclined to blame the congresswoman for China's renewed belligerence. But even before Pelosi's visit, Beijing was already on a path of militarism and aggression due to a creeping economic crisis in its foreign policy. Years ago, when Chinese President Xi Jinping unveiled his flagship Belt and Road initiative, it seemed like a masterstroke in some ways. China was looking for ways to divert its excess infrastructure capacity and stave off overinvestment. Meanwhile, many developing countries were envious of its investment-driven growth model. The solution was to use Chinese money, muscle and workforce to build expensive infrastructure overseas. At first, it was a big hit. People from Tunisia to Tajikistan looked forward to the arrival of posh highways, tall towers and ornate stadiums. But the returns did not quite follow. Many hosts of Belt and Road projects struggled to emulate the Chinese growth model because, simply put, they were not China. They lacked its bureaucratic capacity, cheap skilled labor, land, water and electricity. Many Belt and Road partners were also run by corrupt, authoritarian regimes, which built massive projects more to boost the national ego than the economy. In Sri Lanka, for instance, the recently deposed Rajapaksa clan built a port, airport and conference center in their hometown of Hambantota, which has Sri Lanka in ruins. But the port lost $300 million in 6 years, and the airport was so unproductive that it could not even cover its electricity bills at one point. Meanwhile, the conference center cost over $15 million but has remained largely empty. In Kenya, long-serving President Uhuru Kenyatta has his White Elephant, a $4.7 billion railway project. But public debt has stalled the project's completion, and in 2019-20, one survey found that a whopping 87% of Kenyan respondents believed that their government had borrowed too much money from China. All told, some 19 emerging economies, ranging from Sri Lanka and Lebanon to El Salvador and Pakistan, are either already in default or on the brink, according to Bloomberg. Many owe some of their debt to China, which means public anger towards Beijing is also rising. China now has a difficult choice: forgive and restructure a few loans, thereby setting a precedent for its remaining loans, or be firm and see economic partners potentially collapse. However, these nations can also nationalize the debt-trap loans, removing the Chinese yoke from the people. Either way, the Belt and Road Initiative is now in distress, and Beijing's capacity to rescue the pandemic has shrunk it. For Xi, all this is beginning to represent an inflection point in foreign policy. For years, China focused on economic matters at home and abroad as it sought to build its strength and bide its time. But as its economic influence encounters roadblocks worldwide, there are signs of a pivot in Chinese diplomacy, pushing it towards geopolitical wrangling and militarism. Tensions in the Taiwan Strait were high even before Pelosi visited the island. Following the visit, Japan said that some of China's missiles landed in its exclusive economic zone near Taiwan. China recently signed a controversial pact with the Solomon Islands that would reportedly allow Honiara to request Beijing to send police or military personnel to help maintain social order. That agreement came a few months after a mass protest against the Solomon Islands government for its decision to cut ties with Taiwan. But as debt-laden governments elsewhere begin to draw public wrath, such agreements may become more common, not least to protect Chinese investments. The one thing going for Xi so far, however, is that the U.S. has been unable to replace China as an investment partner. Officials in Washington have noted that the U.S. government cannot order private companies to take their money to Kenya or Somalia, as Chinese state-owned entities do. Xi will also gain from democratic backsliding across Asia and Africa, as those countries balk at depending on Washington. According to Freedom House, as many as 60 countries suffered from declines in freedom over the past year. That many of them are geopolitically crucial countries. Yet, despite those opportunities to keep its global influence expanding in an era of economic distress and political centralization, China may pursue a more aggressive foreign policy than it ever has. However, China now operates in a highly hostile world, where the world blames her for her biological warfare against the world COVID-19.